Today we're going to start with a story about the 6 monkeys who are all blind who wanted to figure out what an elephant was. Some of you people may recognize this story is somewhat similar to the story of the elephant of, what was it, the Hindu. The Hindus had the elephant, or not? But it's a nice little story and we're going to tell it after the dog stopped barking. The great king monkey heard a great cry, and he asked his 6 blind slave monkeys to explain to him what the noise was. So the 6 blind monkeys, they went down to the noise and found themselves what we know as an elephant. But of course they didn't know about elephants at the time, because this was back before people knew about things. And so each one of the monkeys grabbed onto a part of the elephant, and if you don't know the story, then, well, you have to look for it. The 7 blind monkeys is probably how you would find it better. Anyhow, they all grabbed one guy grabbed the trunk, one grabbed the ear, one grabbed the tusk, one stuck his head up his ass. And so when they got back to tell the king monkey what an elephant was, all 6 of them had a slightly different story. I mean, the guy with his head up the elephant's ass had a completely different story than the guy that was holding on to the elephant's trunk. And I think the rest of the story you can figure out. I'm referring you to the 7 blind monkey story is we're trying to have a different viewpoint of the Bible to see if we can understand it. Most of our understanding of the Bible has been from theologians. And what a theologian is someone that believes in one true God. And I don't do that because I don't think it's a very good idea. And if you want to do that, that's up to you. But we're going to explain about Moses so we understand where this one true God concept came from. And we'll start with the beginning of his, well, we'll set the stage before the fellow was born. By the end of Genesis, we had 70 Israelites in Egypt, and they were all well liked because Joseph, the guy with the many-colored raincoat thing, he had a very good relationship with the pharaoh, and he ran the country and kept them from starving. And while they kept them from starving, they also managed to collect all the wealth of the lands, and Egypt was then a very rich place, and most of the people were workers. And most of the Israelites were having a really good time up until the pharaoh that was a friend of Joseph died. The next guy came along and he didn't know Joseph, and he didn't really care too much about Joseph. And one of his advisors, or many of his advisors, said that it was time to do something about all these Israelites. They were getting out of hand. There were just simply too many of them. So they figured the best thing to do would be to hold them down and make sure, let's do the quote from verse 10, let us deal shrewdly with them. Okay, that was the only way to keep people down, of course, is to keep them held down. We'll go right to verse 11. So they set taskmasters over them to oppress them with forced labor. Okay, so what they're doing is they're making slaves out of the many Israelites that had been there in Egypt, and they were outnumbering the Egyptians, and they had to make slaves out of them with very brutal conditions, or had to, or chose to. But even with the hard conditions of building bricks and working in the fields in the hot sun, the Egyptians, the Israelites multiplied and multiplied and multiplied. And the pharaoh said to the midwives, the Hebrew midwives, if a woman has a baby and it's a boy, kill it. That's verse 16. And of course they didn't. The Hebrew midwives didn't kill the babies, because, I mean, who wants to kill babies? And we'll go to verse 19, when the pharaoh asks, well, how come you didn't kill the babies? Came back, I don't know, a few weeks or months or years later, and the answer was, because the Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women. They're vigorous, and they just drop out the women, the babies. The women drop out the babies, well, I mean, they just pop them out. I mean, that's a little bit overdone, and it's probably almost a little bit racist to say that the not racist, because there is no race. It's a bit ridiculous to say that a woman just drops out a baby out in the field while she's working. But that was her excuse, and I guess the pharaoh probably didn't believe it, because he came back shortly later in verse 22 and said, "Every boy that is born you shall throw in the Nile." And this was no uncertain terms. He was sick and tired of the overpopulation of the Israelites, and he wanted a control on it. So that's a setup for our hero Moses. He was born into a system of brutal slavery. This verse here was near the beginning of the slavery, so Moses pops in 400 years later, so there's about a 400-year gap between this chapter and the next chapter. So the stage for Moses is a stage that is a very common stage. There was a clan, and the father of the clan was Jacob, or better known as Israel, and he had his 12 sons from his 4 different wives or concubines or whatever you call them, and they all went down to Egypt with the help of Joseph going there first, and they made themselves a place, probably through what we would call corruption and deceit, giving themselves a very good place in Egypt, while the rest of the Egyptians ended up being stolen. Their land was stolen from them, and during this hunger of the famine of 7 years. So the whole thing was a bit of a stress thing. It was one tribe, one huge tribe, by the time the Moses story comes along, one huge tribe of Israelites against a huge tribe of various tribes of the Egyptians. So it's a bit of a vigilante kind of a story going back and forth. It will keep going back and forth, but we're going to concentrate on the story about where the Israelites were down pressed by the ruling regime, and how Moses popped out and took the masses who were in utter desperation. And of course, when the masses are in utter desperation, some asshole is going to pop up and explain to them, we can do it different.